the Formed Book Club. Catholic book lovers unpacking good books, chapter by chapter.
Welcome to the Formed Book Club. We continue our lively discussion, not heated, but lively, on Dare We Hope, Though Men Be Saved by Hans Urs von Balthasar. We completed chapter 2 in the last session. Balthasar has talked about what the state of the question is, what the controversy is, the claim that he says we're all saved and hell is empty. Second chapter, what does Scripture say? Two sets of texts, generally pre-Easter and post-Easter, damnation and hope for salvation of all. Now we're going to go into the history of the church, and this chapter is called Origen and Augustine. And the reason it's called that is that Origen is 3rd century, of course, and Augustine is 5th century. But they were two major Christian thinkers and writers of the early church. And Origen is accused of apostasis in Greek, decided that eventually all are saved, even hell is empty. He never taught that. He discussed it as a possibility before it was ever something that was a dogma of the church against it. He was later considered a heretic, but that's a whole historical story. And then Augustine, who was the first one who kind of codified this idea of the massa damnata, that we know there is with certainty a certain number of people who in fact are eternally damned. So this chapter will talk about those two patristic views and their antecedents and their descendants or consequence. Mm-hmm. So the first paragraph is this. Under the above heading, what page is it on for you?
32.
32. That is Origen and Augustine. A broad summary account will be given of how judgment was understood during the early centuries of church history, up to the point at which the great decision was made, up to Augustine. It will be best to proceed as follows. First, the official church documents, and then the words of the liturgy will be sounded out. Second, theological speculation about hell will be investigated. Finally, the decision made by Augustine will be considered. So we've looked at Scripture. Now it's early church, reflection, both officially, magisterium, and unofficially, theologically. A few lines down, he says, before the 5th century, there is no such formulation that makes any mention of the twofold outcome of judgment. That is, some going to heaven, some going to hell. There's no church, comment on that. He says a little further on, every Christian creed, now this is early church formation of doctrine, can take no other position than that under the judgment of Christ, and must therefore confront the believer with both ways, the two possible outcomes of his destiny.
That's right.
All right, well,
so that's basic. That's just basic Christian, that's just part of the basic Christian belief that man has a choice to make. Just like in the Old Testament, when Moses delivers the law, choose life or death. Choose God or not, right? It's the same. We're faced with the same choice.
Yeah, just a question here. It's a question more than anything else, or a quibble, whatever. But, up to a point, sometimes the church does not mention something because it's something which is universally accepted and embraced. And it's only when a heresy comes along that questions it. That's why the creeds develop, right, and become more intricate, because it becomes necessary to define something which everybody sort of knew, but now some people are questioning, so we now have to put it in writing, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that before the 5th century there wasn't a universal acceptance of a particular position. It's merely that the church did not feel it necessary to resolve the issue until perhaps people started questioning it.
That's a good point. And I think he's going to go into that. Well, what did the church say? And what did the theologians say when it did become something which is controverted? So I have a number 2. What does that show for you folks? Number 2, the number 2 in the text.
Yeah, I'm on page 35, which is under number 2, but several chapters.
35. Okay.
34 has number 2 at the top.
Okay. Yeah. So he says there, if we shift our attention from the church's faith and prayer to theological speculation, that's what you do here, a few lines down, following Matthew 25, which remains the leading text, the reality of hell is treated without exception. The reality, okay? He goes to Tertullian, who, quote, will laugh when he watches one day, looking down from heaven as, quote, all the idolized kings, all the authorities who persecute Christians, all the sages and philosophers with their schools are roasted, close quote. Then he says, the sadism of Tertullian was not imitated by his student Cyprian or by anyone else.
Thank goodness.
Also, Tertullian, there are still texts from him that are in the Liturgy of the Hours in the Office of Readings, but he's a heretic. He was condemned by the church, and he ended his life separated from the church. So I've always wondered, well, how much weight should we give his view of things? He also is the author of the famous statement, "Credo qui absurdum." I believe because it's absurd. No, wait a minute.
That's not the reason to believe it.
No. A few lines down from what I just quoted, it is astonishing that we have to await the advent of the 2 most important preachers of hell, Chrysostom and Augustine, before the actual essence of the pena damni, that is the punishment of damnation of the damned, the loss of grace and vision of God, comes clearly to consciousness. It's interesting, as you say, Joseph, things are taken for granted, but at the same time, there wasn't reflected on until this time.
Well, I might quibble with that because this is his judgment from 2 millennia on, 1500 years on, or what have you. This comes clearly to consciousness. It might have been clear in consciousness to everybody, but not questioned. So it's not until it's questioned that, from the perspective of the historian, the theologian, it's becoming open to clear to consciousness. Before that, it wasn't. It might have been, but no one was quibbling about it. No one was questioning it, so no one had to talk about it much, right? There was an acceptance, a general acceptance. That may not be the case. I'm just trying to be logical.
Right, but being logical, it cuts both ways. The opposite might have been taken for granted too. What
I'm saying is that it's a bit like Chesterton's approaching the everlasting man, that we make presumptions about the past that the evidence doesn't actually offer. So that's what I'm really saying here is that if something is not controversial, it's probably not going to be questioned or talked about. That's what I'm saying.
But what was not controversial? Well, either position might have been not controversial.
Yeah, I'm not passing judgment on that. I'm just saying.
I know. That logically, it doesn't follow. All Balthasar trying to do is saying, well, when did discussion about this come up?
Yeah.
Before that, it was either taken for granted one way or the other, but it wasn't. It's interesting. It didn't enter into, discussion until several centuries after Christ. It's just a fact.
It's absolutely fact. Don't question that at all. It's just the question is whether it was questioned, right? And if it wasn't questioned, then it would not be discussed. To sort of say the church didn't actually know what it believed until it defined it is not necessarily the case. So it's a bit like things like
I know, but Joseph, the question, the problem,
like the assumption, Father. Right.
The problem, Joseph,
is the assumption, long centuries after everyone believed it.
The problem, Joseph, is with the word "it." It wasn't discussed. Does it mean certain people are damned, or does it mean all can be saved? We don't know what the "it" is until we discuss it.
I'm not disagreeing with you about it. I'm really saying that we shouldn't presume that it was not thought about. Because it wasn't became something controversial until
I know, but we're not
5th century.
We're not. in order to proceed with the discussion or argument, we can't be arguing what people thought about. We have to argue about what they said.
No, but Father, the implication could be that the church didn't have an opinion or a position prior to that, and that people didn't really know. And that's not necessarily the case. That's the point I'm making.
I didn't follow that. Did you follow that? Can you explain that to me?
Well, I think he's saying that just because we don't have a written record of something doesn't mean it wasn't discussed or thought about in a certain way. We don't know. You're actually both saying the same thing. You're saying we don't know what it is, and you're just using it in a sentence regardless of what it is. But the fact of the matter is that unless we have written writings from a certain time period, we don't know very much.
I suppose that what I should be saying about it, to clarify, would be consensus. There might have been a consensus prior to this, although we don't know what it is because it wasn't discussed. In other words, what I'm trying to get clear here is the church didn't sort of not know or not care prior to these things being defined and discussed. It may have known and cared, but there was a consensus, which meant it wasn't particularly talked about because everybody knew.
I know, but the reason I'm resisting is that this argument is properly used in things like the Immaculate Conception, which wasn't defined until 1854, or the primacy of Peter, which wasn't defined until 1870 70 in the First Vatican Council. And it's used to say, well, the church has always believed that. It just wasn't defined until then. I don't want to have that switch over to the thing, well, the church has always believed that some people were in hell, but it wasn't defined or expressed until then. I just want to make it clear that the fact that it wasn't defined or spoken about or written about until the century does not mean it's true or false. It could have been either one of the cases true, that were true before that. We just don't know.
Which is why I'm ascribing the word consensus to the word it that I was using. I'm not saying what the consensus was because we don't know.
Right.
All right. We all agree, apparently.
I'm just going to go forward, assuming that we do.
All right.
Well, I have something on page 35. If no one has anything before that,
go ahead.
Again, the question about what hell is. All right. So towards the bottom of page 35, is it a thing, a place that God creates to put people in, or is it something we make for ourselves? Right. So here, might the fire meant by Christ in his words be a spiritual one, consisting of the tortures of conscience in the sinful soul that knows itself to have fallen away from God's order forever? And I'm thinking, literally with Milton's Satan. Milton's Satan says, "Myself am hell." All right.
I'm sorry. What page are you on?
Page 35, about 2/3 of the way down. The second sentence, well, after the colon, in the final paragraph there. Might the fire meant by Christ be a spiritual one, consisting of the tortures of conscience?
Oh. Now I found it. Thank you.
So again, I think this is crucial. One way, does God create a place called hell, which he sends us to be punished, or is hell something we send ourselves to because of our refusal to love both God and neighbor? And I think this is crucial. So I think, again, with Milton's words, when Satan says, "Myself am hell," Satan can't escape hell because he's become hell.
Right. Well, there's a line he quotes Cardinal Ratzinger on the top of page 40, which also answers this question. He's bringing in C.S. Lewis for the first time beforehand, saying that von Balthasar is positing that Ratzinger and Lewis are in agreement. And this is the statement from Ratzinger on the top of my page 40. Okay, Christ inflicts pure perdition on no one. In himself, he is sheer salvation. Perdition is not imposed by him, but comes to be wherever a person distances himself from Christ. It comes about whenever someone remains enclosed within himself. Christ's word, the bearer of the offer of salvation, then lays bare the fact that the person who is lost has himself drawn the dividing line and separated himself from salvation. And that's what I was clumsily trying to say in our last meeting, that we're the ones who have the agency to either step into hell and stay there for good, or receive the gift of God that saves us, right? And so we're the ones who create this state of separation. So I did have and then he quotes Lewis a little farther down on the same page. Every shutting up of the creature within the dungeon of its own mind is, in the end, hell.
Yeah, and what I do love about him, he reminds me. I know that von Balthasar and de Lubac have a lot in common, and indeed with Ratzinger, and of course his words there were brilliant. But I love the fact he's quoting here. This is just wonderful. So not just the fathers of the church, St. Ambrose and Jerome, weighing in on this question of what exactly hell is, and there's also then this Gustav Martelet, the Jesuit, the interesting stuff. But then he quotes from Lewis. He mentions the Great Divorce there on page 39. But then also Bernanos. This wonderful quote from the Diary of a Country Priest: "Hell is not to love anymore, madame." I mean, it's brilliant. And then we've got the parable of the little onion for the brothers Karamazov, and another for the brothers Karamazov of hell and hellfire. Obviously I'm a literature person, so this speaks to me in a way that the dry theology doesn't. But I love the fact that von Balthasar and de Lubac bring all of this literary richness to the discussion. It just enlivens it and brings it to life for me in a real way.
And that is characteristic of their persons. I mean, both of them were great lovers of real Western culture. And Balthasar, of course, translated, Bernanos and Claudel and Péguy into German. Couple of things going back just a page or two on where footnote 10. Because in the text that refers to that footnote, it says, "From all this it is clear, for one thing, that we cannot say that God has created hell." And in the footnote, he's referring to this fellow Hermes, G. Hermes, who is, again, kind of the rad trad of his time. Quote, "It is certain that an all-knowing God would not have created such a hell if we're not also to be people." But against this, Michael Schmaus, who is a great German dogmatic theologian, very close to Ratzinger, hell was created by the creature, not by God. Everyone damned creates the hell appropriate to himself, and that's key.
And then, as you just pointed out, Joseph, now Ratzinger finds echoes of this idea in other great minds he admires, like Joseph Ratzinger and C.S. Lewis and Dostoevsky and Bernanos. So yes, this is something I love about him too.
I would say one thing as well, though, on Schmaus's comment there. I think this distinguo is we just need to at least point it out. Hell and its eternity are created by man, not God. Well, of course, there are demons in the hell. So, again, this is a question, right?
He doesn't say by man. He doesn't say by man. By the creature.
That's what you said, but in the translation we've got here, it says, "Hell and its eternity created by man, not God." In the version we have here.
That should be creature.
Well, it's interesting.
Because every creature that has will has this capacity.
But I don't know what you said in German.
Yeah, good luck.
You're absolutely correct. Creature would incorporate angels, right? I agree.
Okay, footnote 10. Footnote 10. Ja, die Hölle ist vom Geschöpf erschaffen, from the creature.
That's so important because you know what?
From God.
How
did that happen?
Well, that needs to be fixed because when I was reading this very thing, and I have here, what about Satan? Because it's saying no one but man can be blamed for its existence. Wait a minute. So if you change that to creature, then that means any creature with will, whether it's man or pure spirit who has will, creates hell.
Yeah.
So put a note in the front there so we can, I always mark it on these pages in the very front.
Right.
What page it is, and we'll tell Debbie, and then we get the reprint. We'll have
so
it fixed.
where does you read the German?
Oh yeah, but I mean,
it says footnote 10 on page 37. It says,
are we fixing the note or are we fixing the text?
The note.
Oh.
Hell and its eternity are created by man.
The text also has to be.
Oh, does it?
Fixed. Okay, hell and its eternity are created by man. This should be creature, right?
Right, no one but man can. So it has to be correct in the text as well as the footnote. Yes.
And it has to be fixed in the text. And I'm going to put these changes on the front page of the production copy. So then,
I like the fact that the Form Book Club's become an editorial meeting for Ignatius Press. This is good. It's practical.
Well, and I want to encourage all those readers out there, if you ever find a mistake in Ignatius Press book, because they all do have mistakes in them, please send them to us, because when we reprint books, we fix them. And
Amen.
no book is without its mistakes.
But is there? No one but man can be blamed for his existence.
Yeah.
And how can that
it needs to be corrected in both the text
the German, what does that say?
And the footnote.
Yeah. It does say in German, niemand anderer als der Mensch kann schuld sein an ihrer Existenz. No other man can be guilty for its existence. We'll correct Balthasar, because I think he's in the context of.
And he's not going to argue at that point. I mean, in
terms of human beings going to hell, no one can be responsible for that except the human being himself.
That's
But it's not clear yet.
It's not clear, and I
Okay, we got to fix it.
Okay.
So can I staying in this footnote 10 further down? Can I make a comment on some of the words of Gustav Martelet, Martelet, presumably the Jesuit?
Yeah.
What is it, Martelet? Because he's German. I don't know if he's German or French.
No, he's French. Martelet.
Martelet. Okay. So I was going to read the whole thing, but I like the fact he's saying hell is an absurdity here, because I want to sort of talk about this. So at the top of page 38, the footnote obviously takes up most of the page there. The more the love bestows shows itself to be infinite, the more its refusal makes of itself an absolute. So the refusal of an infinite love, the more that it's done, is an absolute. And then a few lines further down, for hell is the real absurdity. I love that. It's a good quote. And then a few lines further down, apart from that case, hell, this unthinkable and absurd thing, still retains in the gospel the character of a possibility. But that is to be correctly understood. If we speak of a refusal of love, then never of God, who would refuse love. So again, this is crucial. And what I love about this is existentialism, because the existentialists believe that reality is hell, basically. I mean, the theater of the absurd, right? That's the whole existentialist thing, that reality is absurd, and our part in it, playing as actors in this theater of absurd, is also absurd and ultimately meaningless. And the one with courage commits suicide and exits stage left, right? But what we have here is this definition of hell as the theater of the absolutely absurd, right? That what you're creating already in your existentialism is your own hell, right? And if you insist upon it, it will be the absolute absurdity of hell itself.
Well, Sartre, the king of existentialism, did say other people are hell.
Right.
Hell is other people. Okay. And so now when you see, which is, of course, in the blessedness of God are all those who love him. So heaven is a communion. It is going to have other people in it. In fact, if that's not the heaven you want, you might consider hell as an alternative.
I love in the Great Divorce how hell is an infinitely large suburb where everybody hates their neighbor. They want to get as far away from them as possible, and
they keep drifting farther and farther and farther away from each other, right?
In their own isolation. So I've got a new definition of hell based upon these comments. That hell is existentialism in aeternum.
And that's why, well, I don't know if that's why is the correct thing to say, but Camus he just started distancing himself from this kind of existentialism because he saw what? He saw that man was in fact free to make good choices, and that those good choices not only did they have subjective meaning for the person, but they also had a positive impact on other people, that you could make the world a better place by being a good man. So he was starting to distance himself from this other people are hell sort of thing, and that existence itself is hell. He's like, no, Camus could see, oh no, there's existences that are hell, and then there are existences that are not hell. And unfortunately, he died too young, because where would he have ended up if he was definitely on, I mean, I can't say definitely, what do I know? But when I read him, I certainly feel like I'm reading a man who's on his way.
Yeah, it's a bit like George Orwell, when his last works at Animal Farm in 1984, you've got to think that, that he's also on the right trajectory, and then he also dies of tuberculosis tragically young, in his mid-40s. So.
All right. So moving on in this chapter, Origen and Augustine, what do you have next?
Well, I guess I didn't really underline much with Origen. I did. Well, I think I perked up again when Augustine came on the scene, because he does say some things that are just like, wow, okay.
I do question something on page 42, if I may, about
go for it.
Saint Jerome, right? Because
number 3.
Page 42, about 8 lines down. So it's number 3, the number 3 in the. So he quotes, Ambrose remains formal on the matter, and Jerome no less so. Quote, whoever gives himself over to Christ wholeheartedly, even if he has died in his sin, lives forever by virtue of his faith. Well, insofar as someone has given himself over to Christ wholeheartedly, right, he's not an immortal sin, right? So I don't see how this is an argument for that somebody in mortal sin is being saved. If someone's given themselves over to Christ wholeheartedly, completely, they're in love with Jesus, they're not in mortal sin.
Well, your argument is with Jerome, of course, but
yes,
But what Balthasar says in that second sentence in number 3, at first the view still existed among them that no Christians, even if they had sinned grievously, end up in hell. And so he's just demonstrating that. He's not saying that, that if you got mortal sin and you're Christian, you go to heaven. But like I think Jerome here was a little ambiguous, it seems to me.
Well, and it may be that the whole venial sin, mortal sin, or whatever became a later development, differentiating between these. Jerome is still pretty early, and so it could be that.
I think all he's really saying there, surely, is if you're. So let's say you're technically in a state of mortal sin. You've committed a mortal sin. You haven't gone to confession, right? But before you die, you give yourself over wholly to Jesus, which of course would include a de facto or de jure act of penance, right?
Yes.
Obviously, that you're not going to go to hell. I mean, that's not a problem, but neither is it an argument for the fact that everybody's going to heaven and no one's going to hell.
Balthasar simply, as Father said, Balthasar is simply using that quote to demonstrate the conviction on the part of Christians of this time that Christians had a very strong hope that they would go to heaven, that even if they died in sin, they would still go to heaven. So he's not saying he agrees or disagrees with it. He's only saying here's an illustration that this kind of hope in ultimate salvation existed among these people. That's all he's doing.
Yeah, but I mean, there's one way of looking at this. It sounds, should we say, quasi-Calvinistic, all right? That if you've been baptized, you're saved. You're predestined to heaven. I'm sure that must be Calvinist theologians that are taking these texts and arguing exactly that, right?
Yes,
and they do.
Yeah,
they do. They
course.
take Augustine also.
And that's why I'm not arguing with von Balthasar. I'm addressing the question, right?
Yeah.
There we hope that all can be saved. The thesis of the book, and looking at a saint and a father of the church, of Saint Jerome, what he says here. Now, is this in some sense on one side or the other in the discussion, or is it in some sense can be construed or misconstrued as heretical? And I'm saying no. Those words there, it's obvious, right? If before you die, you give yourself fully to Jesus in the spirit of love and repentance, you're not going to go to hell. I mean, that's not a problem.
Well, yes, but we have to look at the text in Latin, because here it says, even if he has died in his sin. What does that mean? In his sin. Unrepentant sin, died while he's sinning, shot in the midst of an adulterous act, even though he's given himself to Christ and has fallen in this. It's an ambiguous statement.
It is.
Let's just leave it as an ambiguous statement. Balthasar says after that, much more important is the central question of the existence of everlasting hell in general. Here's where Origen comes in, and what Balthasar says, well, people are claiming that Origen said hell is either non-existent or it's going to disappear. But in the middle of that paragraph, he says, after note 27 there in the text, the actual opinion of the master, that is Origen, has been brought to light with great precision by Cardinal de Lubac.
Interesting.
So this is a great book by de Lubac. And further on,
this is page 43 for us, Joseph, in the middle.
Yeah, I've got it. Highlighted it. Thanks.
If, however, God's rewards lie above and beyond all this imagining, because Paul says, as he says above, what God has prepared for those, is not, eye is not seen, ear is not heard, etc. Must the same not also be true of divine punishments? We're not sure what they're going to be or what they're going to be like. Then this long quote from de Lubac, his wonderful book on Catholicism.
That's page 44.
44. Yep. Mm-hmm. I want to read that, and we can maybe conclude after that, shortly after that. We still live in the realm of images, whether we are spiritual or carnal, perfected, in quotes, or beginners. So we have to use images. In this respect, our condition is the same. The ultimate ground of the mystery, capital G, whether adhered to in simple faith or pondered and researched by men of understanding, is inaccessible to us all. Origen takes care not to venture any statement. All the texts to which our homilies are linked never have as their theme an everlasting hell or a universal salvation.
Wow, that's an eye popper.
It is.
Yeah,
so Origen never...
It's mentioned somewhere else as well that basically this is all apocryphal. That that's probably not the right word under the context, but that these things ascribed, beliefs ascribed to Origen are not actually in his works.
Wow.
Well, de Lubac is the one who, in the 20th century, rehabilitated Origen by reading thoroughly everything Origen had written, and then making a book called Histoire et Esprit, History and Spirit. We have it in Ignatius Press. Is a kind of summary of this. Good. I think we probably should conclude this time. Well, let's conclude with, we finished off Origen here briefly. We'll start with Augustine next time. All right?
Sounds good.
Thanks, everybody. See you later.
You.
God bless. Bye.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please help spread the word about the Forum Book Club by subscribing to the podcast and writing a review. You can sign up for weekly updates at forumedbookclub.ignatius.com.